this lady became a socialite's darling and a symbol of an England that was more carefree and opulent thanks to her wit and charm. Here is a tale of rags to riches and everything in between, as we now look at the life of Nell Gwyn. A lot of Nell's past is shrouded in mystery. Her date of birth is given as the 2nd of February 1650. However, this has been disputed, but for this video, we will assume the date I've just given. In many ways, the mystery surrounding Nell's exact date of birth mirrors the mystique surrounding her entire life. We know a lot about Nell because of her plays, satirical poetry, art, diaries and letters she left behind. Consequently, much of the information is based on hearsay and rumour and should be treated with caution. Her mother Ellen was born in the parish of St Martin in the Fields, which extended from Soho and Covent Garden beyond Mayfair. She is thought to have spent the majority of her life in the West End, and she was known as Old Madam or Madam Gwyn. Nell's mother allegedly drowned after falling into the water near Chelsea. She was 56 years old and laid to rest at St Martin's in the Fields on the 30th of July, 1679. 3 cities claim to be the birthplace of Nell Gwyn: Hereford, London, specifically Covent Garden, and Oxford. There isn't much evidence to support any of these theories. The fact that Gwyn is a Welsh surname may support Hereford's claim, as its county borders Wales. Some say Nell's mother was born and raised in London, and it seems like the most obvious choice. So by the time Nell was a young girl growing up in Covent Garden, her father seemed to be long gone, leaving her and her alcoholic mother to struggle. Between 1663 and 1667, she experimented with dressing as a man while taking on the role of William Nell and wearing a fake beard. Her conclusions informed a hilarious performance as a man on stage in March 1667. As for her mother, well, old Madam Gwyn made her living by running a brothel, and it would be where Nell would spend most of her free time. Around 1662, Nell allegedly had a lover named Duncan or Duncan. Their relationship lasted for about 2 years, and Duncan gave Gwyn a room in the tavern in Maypole Alley, and he helped Nell get a job at the nearby theatre. Throughout Oliver Cromwell's decade of protectorate rule, frivolous pursuits, including theatre, were prohibited. But when Charles II ascended to the throne of England in 1660, he promptly reinstated these establishments. Early in his reign, Charles granted permission to establish 2 theatre companies, and he legalised the profession for women. With the help of Thomas Killigrew, the King's Company opened a new theatre on Bridges Street in 1663. Today, it's known as the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. Orange Moll, a former prostitute and friend of Madam Gwyn, had been granted a licence to sell oranges and lemons as well as other fruits and confectionery within the theatre. Moll then hired Nell and her older sister Rose to work as scantily clad orange girls, selling small oranges for 6pence each to the audience. It was while working here this had allowed Nell to meet members of London's elite, since it was the King's Playhouse and Charles was a frequent attendee of its productions. The Orange Girls would deliver messages between the actors on stage and the men in the audience, of course for a fee, but on some occasions these messages ended in sexual favours for the Orange Girls. For the first time in England's history, the new theatres featured actresses in roles traditionally played by men or boys. The year after being an Orange Girl, Nell joined the Bridges Street cast as a 14-year-old actress. Killigrew was drawn to her by her good looks, clear voice and wit, but she had to confirm that she was a competent enough actress to make it in the business. It was not easy in the Restoration Theatre. Plays typically ran for only a few weeks due to the limited audience pool. Yet the theatrical troupe could mount 50 different productions during the 9-month season from September to June. Nell would attend a school for young actors founded by Killigrew and Charles Hart, himself a fine male actor. Here she learned acting and dancing from John Lacey, who was rumoured by some to be her lover.
It's unclear when Nell began performing professionally on the Restoration stage, just like there's a debate over when she was born. It's possible that she made her first appearance around 1664 in minor roles. However, the exact date of her debut is unknown because cast and playgoers' diaries from the period rarely mention minor players. Whatever her initial role as an actress was, it is clear that by 1665 she had established herself as a more prominent actress. A play on Monday the 3rd of April 1665 is when she's first mentioned in Pepys' diary as a pretty, witty Nell. Using only her first name in this way suggests that Nell had established her celebrity status both on and now off the stage.
From mid-1665 until the end of 1666, the Great Plague in London forced closures of the Bridge Street Theatre and the rest of the city. Gwyn and her mother followed the king and his court for a while, spending time in Oxford. During their absence from the virulent capital, the king's company is thought to have staged some private theatrical productions for the court. When they were first sent into exile, Gwyn and the other 10 women actors in His Majesty's Theatre received permission to wear the king's livery and the cloth that went along with it, making them official servants of the monarch. It wasn't long after the theatres were reopened in 1667 before Nell Gwyn matched up with Charles Sackville, then known as Lord Buckhurst. When people talked about him, they used words like cultured, witty and satirical, and he allegedly provided her £100 every year in exchange for not acting any longer. But as of late August, Nell had returned to her old ways, and her brief liaison with Buckhurst had ended. Samuel Pepys records Nell's return to the King's Playhouse in The Indian Emperor on the 22nd of August, 1667.
Late in 1667, George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, assumed the role of unofficial manager for Nell's love affairs, which he continued until he died in 1668. He wanted to replace Barbara Palmer, the King's current mistress and Buckingham's cousin, so that Buckingham would have more say in court. According to reports, the plan was a failure. Nell requested £500 a year in maintenance and was turned down because it was considered excessive. The Buckingham's alternative strategy was to introduce the King to actress Moll Davis, a member of the Duke's Company, a rival theatre troupe.
The King and Nell's love affair allegedly began in April of 1668. Nell was at the Lincoln's Inn Fields Theatre to see George Etheridge's She Would If She Could. The King sat in the following box along, and according to reports, he was more interested in flirting with Nell than he was in watching the play. As well as Charles's brother, the Duke of York, Charles also invited Nell and her partner to dinner. Here is where the story becomes slightly alarming for Nell and quite possibly entirely unfounded. However, the King following dinner discovered that he had no money on him. Neither did his brother, and Nell was forced to foot the bill. She would mimic the King, saying, "But this is the poorest company I've ever been in."
As the mistress of Charles Hart and Charles Sackville before him, Nell jokingly referred to the King as her Charles III. Nell's relationship with the King had become well known by the middle of 1668, but there's little cause to suppose it would last. She continued to perform at the King's house, and her new fame drew larger audiences and inspired playwrights to write roles just for her. However, as her devotion to the King deepened, her acting career waned.
Throughout his life, King Charles II had many mistresses, both brief liaisons and long-term relationships. Aside from that, Charles had a wife, the Portuguese Queen Consort Catherine of Braganza, whose 3 pregnancies all resulted in miscarriages. She had little or no say in his choice of consorts or mistresses, yet it came to an abrupt end shortly after their marriage in 1662. In what became known as the Bedchamber Crisis, a conflict between Catherine and Barbara Palmer. Having been shunned by the court and having most of her entourage sent back to Portugal, Catherine had no choice but to agree to Charles's mistresses being awarded semi-official status. Although other women were vying for Charles' attention during Nell's first years with him, she had little competition. Barbara Palmer was on the decline physically and mentally, while others like Moll Davis remained out of the public eye and away from Whitehall. On the 8th of May 1670, Nell gave birth to Charles, her first child. That was also the King's 7th son. the result of 5 different mistresses.
It wasn't long after that Louise de Querouaille made her way over from France to England, where she served as Queen Catherine's maid of honour, while also taking on the role of another mistress for King Charles. For the next few years, she and Nell would be rivals. They were complete opposites in terms of personality and demeanour. Louise was a proud woman of noble birth, accustomed to Versailles sophistication, while Nell was a spirited prankster and ex-orange wench. Louise was dubbed Squintabella by Nell due to her appearance and Weeping Willow due to her sobbing tendencies.
Nell returned to the stage in late 1670, an extraordinary thing to do for a mistress with a royal child. Dryden's epic The Conquest of Granada featured her return. 1671 was almost certainly her final season, and this play could have been her last. Nell Gwyn's stage career lasted 7 years and ended when she was 21, if we take 1650 as her birth year. Nell then moved into 79 Pall Mall, a brick townhouse, in February 1671. The property belonged to the Crown, who ordered the current tenant to hand over the lease to Nell. It would become her primary residence for the remainder of her years, and as late as 1960, the property remained the only one on Pall Mall's south side not owned by the Crown, thanks to a freehold granted to Nell in 1676. Nell Gwyn became a mother for the second time, giving birth to James. He was 6 years old when he was sent to Paris to attend school, but sadly he died there a year later in 1681. Nothing is known about the child during his time in Paris, nor what led to his death.
There are 2 conflicting accounts about how the elder of her 2 sons by Charles came to acquire the earldom of Burford. The first and most popular is that when Charles was just 6 years old, Nell said, "Come here, you little bastard, and say hello to your father." But when the king objected to her referring to Charles by that name, she responded saying, "Your Majesty has given me no other name by which to refer to him." In response, Charles elevated him to the position of Earl of Burford. Another idea is that Nell threatened to drop young Charles unless he was granted a peerage by grabbing him and hanging him out of the window of Lauderdale House in Highgate, where she briefly resided. Following his son's life-saving cry of "God save the Earl of Burford," the king officially established the peerage.
Within a short time, the king had granted Nell and her son a house in Windsor's home park, which he renamed Burford House. She resided there during the king's stay at Windsor Castle. On the 6th of February 1685, King Charles II passed away. James II eventually paid off the majority of Nell's debts and provided her with an annual pension of £1,500, following his brother's deathbed wish. But simultaneously, James pressed Nell and her son to convert to Roman Catholicism, but Nell refused. Nell became paralysed on one side after suffering a stroke in March 1687. After suffering a second stroke in May, she was confined to her Pall Mall home, and she made her will on the 9th of July with her executors. On the 14th of November 1687 at 10 o'clock in the evening, Nell Gwyn died, almost likely due to the diverse range of syphilis she had contracted. It was approximately 3 years after the death of the king, and she was 37 years old at the time.
Nell is one of England's most beloved and well-known folk heroines. She rose from poverty and abuse as a child to become King Charles II's most beloved mistress and the heroine of a legendary story of love. In the midst of the Great Fire of London, the plague, numerous court scandals, and the ever-present threat of political upheaval, Nell attracted the Merry Monarch's attention, and the two were involved in a passionate affair that lasted 17 years. On the 17th of November 1687, she was laid to rest in London's Church of St Martin's in the Field. Following a final request from Nell, the future Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Tennyson, delivered a sermon and said, "Indeed, I tell you there will be more joy in heaven over one repentant sinner than there will be over 99 righteous people who do not require repentance."